to begin this episode, I want to talk about something that we've been discussing, not us, obviously, on the show, not us, but something that people around the NBA have been discussing for the last year or so, probably, and that is Luke Walton's employment status with the Sacramento Kings. Anyone who follows the NBA understands that unless you're Eric Spoelstra, unless you're Greg Popovich, unless you're Steve Kerr, your shelf life as an NBA head coach is about 3 years. So you have 3 years your up upon your appointment, I guess. I think that's the appropriate usage of the word. You have 3 years from the time you get promoted to head coach to show something to the rest of the organization. Unfortunately, there are a lot of times that coaches simply don't have enough time to make drastic changes, especially because the ownership is also not only bringing in a new coach, but they're probably bringing in new people all throughout the front office, and it's just very difficult, especially if you're on a bad team. If you're on a non-contending team, it's difficult, and oftentimes owners, for whatever reason, just don't have the patience. And I understand that there are extenuating circumstances, like with my Brooklyn Nets, for example, before they brought in Steve Nash, a decision that I felt was questionable at the time. They got to their peak with Kenny Atkinson, and he wasn't gonna take them any farther, because it gets to a point where players just kind of begin to tune the coaches out, and you just need someone new in the locker room, unless, of course, that person, as I already mentioned, is someone like Eric Spoelstra, is someone like Greg Popovich, is someone like Steve Kerr, someone who's gone and actually done something throughout their tenure. And of course, I know you have to give a coach the opportunity to do that, but it just goes to show the type of respect that these guys command. Now, this instance, we're talking about Luke Walton. Luke Walton, as we know, kind of got the short end of the stick after being hired by the Los Angeles Lakers. He came in at this weird time when LeBron was there and the Lakers were trying to do some cleaning around the front office, but they didn't really, and they kind of just wanted to bring in a coach who, of course, no surprise, coach that LeBron James wanted. Not to say Luke Walton is a bad coach, although he didn't compile the best record. I'm just actually going to pull up his record with the Lakers. Throughout his time in Los Angeles, he compiled a 98 and 148 record. However, we do have to make note of the fact that his teams were not that good. They were not the Lakers team that Frank Vogel has now. There was no LeBron. There was no Anthony Davis. This guy was dealing with like a Lakers team that was post Kobe Bryant, trying to get into the rebuild. Like, we're talking Jordan Clarkson. Let's pull up the roster. Let's take a gander at the first year Luke Walton was head coach of this team. Team goes 25 and 56. Their leading scorer is Lou Williams at 18 points per game, followed by D'Angelo Russell, Jordan Clarkson, Julius Randle, Nick Young, and Brandon Ingram. Obviously, those guys were not yet the players that they are. Now, Jordan Clarkson, sixth man of the year. Julius Randle, an all-star. Brandon Ingram, all-star. D'Angelo Russell, all-star. Luke Walton was set up to fail with the Lakers, more or less. And then, they have this quick turnaround. Next thing you know, you have LeBron James getting ready to sign with your team. And it's kind of like, okay, we have to get ready to win a championship. And the Lakers felt that Frank Vogel was the guy to do this. So Luke Walton was not unemployed for long. He gets hired by Sacramento for it was like 2 seasons ago. That would be the 2019-2020 season. Finishes 31 and 41 in that season, and then finished with the exact same record last year. And the Kings are on pace after 14 games to finish with about the same record. They're 6-8 to begin this season, but The Athletic reported that Luke Walton is on the hot seat. So we're going to go ahead and dive into this. The pressure is mounting on Sacramento Kings head coach Luke Walton. With the Kings 5-8 in the midst of a 4-game losing streak heading into a Monday night game at Detroit, sources say the third-year coach's job status will likely be in peril soon if the current slide continues. The Kings, who started 5-4 before falling to Indiana, Phoenix, 2 quality teams, mind you, San Antonio and Oklahoma City, are determined to break their 15-year playoff drought, the NBA's longest, and Walton won't be given the same leeway to turn things around as he was last season, especially when it comes to extended losing streaks. This is hardly the first time Walton's status has been uncertain last season after the Kings won 7 of 8 in late January and early February. There was a sense from those close to the situation that owner Vivek Ranadiv might make a playoff berth an unofficial qualifier for Walton to keep his job, but that edict never came, even after the Kings had a 9-game losing streak in February and another of the same length less than 2 months later. At the time, sources said Walton's approval rating in the locker room and the partnership he had created with general manager Monty McNair during McNair's first season with the team were factors in his survival. I guess that's saying that, the players were fond of Luke Walton. And I mean, it's kind of hard not to be fond of the guy who came in with the Golden State Warriors having no prior head coaching experience and led them to a 39-4 record in the absence of Steve Kerr. I get that you have Steph, I get that you have Clay and you have Draymond, but you still have to be able to manage all of those players. Being a player manager or being an ego manager, I should say, is the primary duty of a coach that is leading multiple star players, because they're going to go out and they're going to get buckets and they're going to run whatever game plan they want. But you have to make sure that everything stays cool in the locker room. And then you also have to manage the backups the backups minutes, which can be quite challenging. I mean, as we've seen, Steve Nash did not get off to the best start doing that early in his career. He's starting to come around now, which is something that I want to commend about him, and he's learning to stagger the minutes of his stars. Like, it's not the easiest job to just inherit a team like that, especially when that team had been listening to Steve Kerr for however long. The Kings, of course, as we know, are entirely different. This team, Buddy Hield, Harrison Barnes, De'Aaron Fox, Rashawn Holmes, Marvin Bagley, who is currently, he's still playing. He's still with the team. He just wasn't extended. He's still with the team. Tyrese Halliburton as well. I'm just kidding. Marvin Bagley is not with the team right now. I thought he was. Either way, the Kings were expecting themselves to be a playoff team this year. It was definitely possible, but I don't think anyone foresaw De'Aaron Fox taking a little bit of a step back. Last season, this dude was averaging like 26 points a night, shooting like 47% from the field or something like that, having 6-7 assists, and he's not doing that this year. He's down to about 20 points a game, shooting 41% from the field. Right now, the Kings offense is being led by Harrison Barnes, at least in terms of scoring. It's Barnes and Fox that are responsible for most of the offense. And to their credit, the Kings are third in points scored and seventh in efficiency, but everything just falls apart on the defensive end because this team has not one defensive stopper. Kidding. Tyrese Halliburton is a pretty good defender, but when you're like going up against guys like Devin Booker and then Malcolm Brogdon and Domantas Sabonis and then Jakob Poeltl and DeJounte Murray and then Shai Gilgeous-Alexander in a 4-game span, you're going to struggle if you're not a good defensive team. And then you also have to worry about guys like Luka and KP. And then, of course, the Warriors. And then, even if the Pelicans were fully healthy, you'd have to worry about Brandon Ingram and Zion Williamson. Like, if you don't have like a modicum of defensive prowess in today's NBA, you're just going to get ran off the court unless your offense is capable of putting up 120, 125 points every night, taking the Brooklyn Nets type of approach. The Kings simply don't have that right now. Things will probably be a little different when Fox actually begins to shoot at the level that we know he can shoot at. But until then, I don't foresee anything changing for the Kings. They just have to figure out how to harness all of this athleticism that they have, because they do have a lot of athleticism on the perimeter. Tyrese Halliburton. De'Aaron Fox has shown in the past that he can be a great defender. I mean, Harrison Barnes is a big dude, very athletic. Just, put in a little bit of effort, see what happens. Rashawn Holmes is the same way. I mean, the Kings should be better, but to say they're one of the 8 best teams in the conference is tough, because just looking at where they're at now, they're behind Portland and Memphis. We know Memphis is not playing up to the level that they're capable of playing at. Even though Ja is putting up MVP caliber numbers, the Grizzlies should be above 500 at this point. Same thing with the Portland Trail Blazers. And then we have the Lakers, who, of course, a little bit of a skid because LeBron James hasn't played for 2 weeks, so they're going to be better as well. I don't see Sacramento making the playoffs in a loaded Western Conference. They just don't have enough talent. Like Golden State, Phoenix, Dallas, Denver, Utah, the Clippers, the Lakers, Memphis, Portland. I mean, they'll be in it. And then if they make it into the play-in tournament, everything's going to be a little different. Anything can happen there, especially if they get a favorable matchup. I don't know what they're trying to gain from putting it out that Luke Walton is on the hot seat if he doesn't make the playoffs this season. I don't know what their end game is, because you're just going to reset the team beyond where they were last year, because the players at least like Luke Walton. It doesn't matter if it shouldn't fucking matter if upper management is not a fan of whoever the head coach is. They need to hire the best guy for the job. And at the time, Luke Walton was the best guy for the job. Now, to not even give him 3 years, like, this is coming out 14 games into the season. Like, that's a little weird. Why are they trying to control the narrative around this? I get that they haven't been a good team in 15 years, but that's ownership's fault. That's the general manager's fault. And it's even more so ownership's fault, because there's all this fucking turnover within the team. And then no one wants to play there because the team is ran like shit. They didn't have any prospects up until a couple of years ago, when you got De'Aaron Fox and you got Marvin Bagley, and you're like, okay, this could be a 1-2 punch that finally brings us into relevance. And then Luke Walton comes in. It's like, okay, a guy whom the players respect. He's a former player himself. Obviously comes from a great basketball family with his dad, Bill Walton. Learned under Steve Kerr. Got to be around one of the most revolutionary dynasties the NBA has ever seen. Maybe there's a reason that the players like him. Maybe there's a reason that the players have fought to keep Luke Walton at the helm. But I still think that it's going to come to it. The Kings are going to not make the playoffs this season, and Luke Walton's going to be fired. And they're probably going to, I think that they're going to improve over at least compared to the previous years. They might win 35, 36, 37 games, but that still won't be good enough for a playoff spot in the Western Conference, because you got to be at least a 500 team to make one of those, to make the bottom 3 seeds. You got to be at least 42 and 42. And the Kings I don't think the Kings are going to be able to compete. I mean, I think that, again, that's just my opinion. Things could change, and I hope that things change, because De'Aaron Fox, when he's on, that kid is so fun to watch, and he's a bright spot for the Kings. Like, the Kings, they always had DeMarcus Cousins, who stayed there even though he fucking shouldn't have. They wasted all of those years of DeMarcus Cousins' career, and he loves Sacramento. And they didn't to have that during a time when your team is the laughing stock of the league. Like, that's something. And now you have De'Aaron Fox, and the Kings aren't the laughing stock of the league. Granted, they're not the best team in the NBA, but they're not the worst. Houston's worse off. Detroit's worse off. The Pelicans are worse off. There are way worse situations right now. I think that ultimately, if upper management keeps looking at the situation, and of course this never happens, but if they always see that someone else is the problem, what does that say about your leadership? To have a decade and a half of ineptitude, to go through however many head coaches, like 5, 6, 7, 8 head coaches in that span, to have however many different general managers, and the ownership is like, oh, I just don't know what the problem is. The problem is you, dude. The problem is ownership. Of course, there are circumstances where sometimes guys just don't work out, and that's fine. But those chances are not as often as the Sacramento Kings would make you believe that they are. It doesn't happen. If you bring in every coach and he fucking sucks, that's an indictment on upper management for having just either horrible hiring practices or just bullshit decision making that fucks up the roster for the coach that comes in. Like, this is a good roster, don't get me wrong. If we could just pull it up again. I already talked about De'Aaron Fox and Tyrese Halliburton, Harrison Barnes, but like, really, the issue is that Sacramento is about as deep as a puddle. The majority of their points come from their starters. Technically, Buddy Hield is, I guess, their 6th man, because he's only started 2 games this year. But outside of him, Davion Mitchell, who's averaging a shade under 10 points in 26 minutes. Mo Harkless, Terrence Davis, Tristan Thompson, Alex Len. Tristan Thompson and Alex Len they've been in and out of the lineup. I mean, Sacramento, if they do bring in someone who can give them some points off the bench, this is an entirely different team. But that falls on upper management. So we'll see what happens. I'm not going to be shocked if the Kings let Luke Walton go this summer. It's just how it is. And coaches know that. Like, you know that when you take that position, you have 3 years. And if you don't show anything in 3 years, you're going to be out.